Let's hit play. And if you look at the player, like right now our player name is empty or our health is 0. If you load stats, it's gonna fill in the values that we actually saved before. We can of course change this again, save, and now if you modify them and load, they're gonna go back to normal. And that still works even if we close and restart the game. Here we go. Hi, I'm Ricky. Today we're making a save manager in Unity without using PlayerPrefs. The reason we don't use PlayerPrefs is because PlayerPrefs limit us to only 3 types of data, int, float or string, but if you use a custom save manager, we can also save and load custom classes, normal classes that belong to Unity or to C#, really anything. Also, PlayerPrefs are really not a good idea on PC because they save data on the Windows registry, and if you are saving a lot of data, it can make the computer really messy. This save manager is also the exact same one that I use in my personal games that are not on mobile. Making a save manager doesn't take too long, but it's also very easy to make mistakes. So if it's your first time dealing with directories and modifying files through code, make sure you copy what I do character per character. And if you just want to download my project, you can do so through my GitHub. And make sure to subscribe and follow me on Twitter to get updates on whatever video I'm doing. Right now, I'm also developing a new game for PC. It's called AA, all links in the description. Alright, so let's start. One very important thing to know about the save manager though, is that not all types of data can be saved. To know whether a type of data can be saved or not, we have to know whether that type is serializable. So for example, int, float and string are serializable, classes and arrays are serializable, but things like lists and specific classes like transform, they are not serializable. So if at any point you find an error telling you that something you did was not serializable, that's why. In this video we're going to use an int, a string and a custom class. I'm in a Unity project in which I've already made a bit of the UI and the world. I've put no code inside, this is just to have a visual feedback. The camera is a normal camera, the player is literally just a red square, and inside the canvas we got a lot of stuff, but none of it has any code inside it. The only thing that you should worry about are these buttons, which right now have no function inside of them. Before we start, we just have to do something with our project settings. Let's go to Edit, Project Settings, and let's change the company name from default company to something we actually remember. Okay, that's it. We can close the project settings. Alright, so the main logic of our save manager is going to be inside one static script. So let's go in our assets, let's make a new C# script. Let's make it static. For now, we just see how to save and load data. Let's start with the save function. And make sure to mark it as static. To save a type of data, we need 2 parameters. First is the name of the file in which we are going to save the data. And the second is the actual data to save. The thing is, we don't know preemptively what kind of data we're going to use. We want this save manager to be able to save both int, float, string, but also classes, structs, custom classes, stuff like that. While we don't know the type of variable that we're going to be dealing with, we use something called T-key. To make a T-key inside a function, we go in between the name and the parameters, and in between minor and major, we put a T. This is basically the same as getComponent. With getComponent, we put between these signs the type of class that we're trying to get from our game object, like rigid body or player movement if it's a custom class, stuff like that. But the actual function is always the same. Now we don't just need the type of data to save, we also need the content of it. So let's add a T parameter for data to save. Now the first thing to do when we want to save something is make sure the directory in which we're saving something exists. To deal with directory and files, we need to add the library system.io. 90% of the time that someone asks me for a problem in their code, it's because they forgot to add the library. So make sure you always add the library when you're making something. Alright, to check the path of our folder in which we save our files, we first need to get to the folder of our game. So let's make a string that is going to represent the folder in which we keep our save files. Unity already does this to us, we don't need to find it ourselves. We can just use application.persistentDataPath. And based on which system we are operating on, Unity is going to find on its own the right folder for our game. Now this is just the games folder. We actually want to get the saves folder of our games. So to do that, we can do plus and the name of the directory preceded by a slash sign. And we can save this data path in a new string. The slash indicates that we're going into a directory, and 90% of the time it works. It's just gonna combine these two strings together to make a new destination folder. But in some cases, some operating systems don't use the slash sign. To go around this, we can use a function called path.combine. Path.combine takes two string parameters, which are going to be the directories to combine, and then based on the operating system, it's going to decide how to combine them. We don't have to worry about that. Alright, so now we got the destination of our saves folder. Now, folders are also called directory, so if we want to know whether this directory exists, we use directory.exist. And as a parameter, we need to put the path of the directory. Now, if a folder doesn't exist, so we use directory.createDirectory. And we put the same data path. Alright, so now we are sure that we have a saves folder in our games folder. Now we want to create a file inside of it. And to know the name of the file, so also the position of a file, we again use path.combine. In this case, we combine the saves folder path with the file name. Alright, and now we get to the actual part where we open and modify our file. So to open a file, we use file stream. And instead of creating a new file stream, for now let's just make it null. I'll explain why later we do this. It is very easy to make a mistake and potentially mess the computer, which isn't of any danger to the computer, but it doesn't mean that we could have to restart the game or even restart the computer. In order to avoid this kind of problem, let's use try finally. You can type tryf and then double tap. What these keywords mean is that all the code that we do in here is only gonna try to be executed. If at any point inside these brackets an error comes up, this code just won't be executed. On the other hand, everything that happens inside these brackets, it's always gonna be called. It doesn't matter if the try code has been executed or not. The reason is that if you open a file and then you forget to close it, that bugs out the computer. So we try to open a file, but if something wrong happens with it, it doesn't matter, we always try and close it. Alright, so in here, where we actually try to open our file and modify it, let's create an actual file stream. And inside our file stream, we want to put two parameters. The first is the path of the file that we are trying to open. And the second parameter is the type of file mode that we want. So if we want to read or write into it, basically. So we use file mode.create. Make sure it's file mode and not file access. Alright, so right now, what is inside file stream is the actual content of our file. Before we actually save this file, let's format it through a binary formatter. What this does is it makes the content of a file non-human readable. And to use a binary formatter, we have to add its own library, system runtime serialization formatters.binary. Finally, when we save data into a computer, we say that we serialize it. So let's call a formatter and use the serialize function. And as a parameter, we want the actual file and the data to load into it. And then, in the finally brackets, we want to close our file. So let's call our file .close. Now here's the reason why we use equals null in our file stream. If we don't use equal null, it's gonna give us an error saying we've never given a value to our file stream. But also another thing that we have to look for, we can't close a file we haven't opened. So before we close it, let's make a null check. And it's very simple to make a null check in this case, we can just use the question mark. And that's it. This is everything that we want for our save data function. You can already test this in Unity. I'm gonna grab the player and create a new component. I've called it player data save. I want to handle the overall logic of calling the save manager and using the save manager's data to do something, but the actual data that we're gonna save is gonna be in another class. So let's make an example of some class that we're gonna use for saving data. I'm gonna make a dynamic class called player stats. And it's really important that we mark it as serializable. Let's make a new player stats. And this is gonna be the actual data that we save. Now we just need our file's name. And because this is a data path, we don't ever want to change it, so I've marked it as constant. Alright, finally, let's make a function to call the save manager and save our data. Alright, and it's true that the save manager is kinda complicated, but interacting with it is actually really simple. And that's it. As you can see, we've given it our file path and the data to save, but we don't have to do anything else. As you may have noticed, we also didn't have to use the minor and major signs to put our player stats key. We could do this, but it's the actual way to do this, but because we're also passing the same T key in here through the content of our class, C# can recognize the class and it's telling you that it's not necessary. Alright, now let's go to Unity. I'm gonna select the Save Stats button, and as a function, I'm gonna add our player data save, save player stats. Hit play, and before we do anything, let's go open run. Percentage updata percentage. Let's go in appdata local low. In here, you have to find your developer's name. In my case, I put RickyDev, so here I am, RickyDev. And here are all the games in Unity which use the same manager and are marked with RickyDev as the developer. You can see that right now we don't have our save manager tutorial. Let's select our player. Right now, as player stats, we don't have anything. I'm gonna put as player name Ricky and health 2. Now, if you use save stats, and let's go back in our directory, you can see that a save manager tutorial folder has appeared. Inside we have a saves folder, and inside the saves folder we have our file. And even if we close the game, these folders right here and this file, they're still gonna remain here. Alright, so that's the save part of our saving system. Now let's go back to our save manager and let's try and load data. This is gonna look very similar to how we save data actually, so we can just duplicate it. Now the main difference is that load data is gonna return a boolean telling us whether the loading of data was successful. And also, we don't want to save data, we want to load it. And instead of giving in a class, we want to out it. Perfect. Now when we load data, much like when we save it, we want to first check whether the directory of the saves folder actually exists. We are already doing that here, but this time we don't care about creating a directory. If a directory doesn't exist, it means that the file also doesn't exist, so we just return false. Now you see that we're getting an error for return false. That's because we haven't set out the out parameter of data to load. So we have to give some sort of null value to t, but the problem is that t doesn't have a null value. That's because t can both be an int and a class. And while it's true that a class can be null, an int cannot. You see that we get an error. Instead, what we want to do is, if your data to load is a type of int, we want to give it its default value of 0. If it's a string, it's the default value of empty string, and if it's a class, we want to set it to null. There is an easy way to give a default value to a t variable, and that's with default. Alright, next thing, we want to check whether the file actually exists. When we save it, we don't care if the file already exists, we're just gonna overwrite it anyway, but when we load it, we want to know if it exists, because if it doesn't, again, we return false. So we're already getting the file path in here. In this case, to check whether a file exists, we use file.exists. Alright, and finally we can actually load the data. So again, we use a file stream, and then instead of modifying it, we load it. So instead of filemode.create, we use filemode.open. We again create a new variant formatter, but this time we don't want to serialize it, we want to deserialize. In this case, the only parameter of deserialize is the file stream, and the function is going to return us the content of the file. Now we can't load the data as is, we also need to cast it into the type of data, so we can cast it into a t. While for closing the file, it's going to be exactly the same. One final thing, we also need to return a value to know whether the loading data was successful. Because of how try and finally execute, we don't really know how it's going to go. Let's first make a boolean value, and let's set it to false by default. Then, only if we manage to deserialize the data, we set it to true. And then, at the end, we return was data load successful. And that's it. We got our save and our load system. Let's go into player data save and let's make a new function to load player stats. Let's call load data. And if we are successful in loading our data, then we just set player stats to the out value. And that's it. Let's go to Unity. Let's get our button, load stats. And let's assign it our new function, load player stats. Let's hit play. And if you look at the player, like right now our player name is empty or our health is 0. If we load stats, it's gonna fill in the values that we actually said before. We can of course change this again, save, and now if you modify them and load, they're gonna go back to normal. And that still works even if we close and restart the game. Here we go. Alright, so that's it for basic save manager system. If you want to save some other type of data, you can go in your player data save and add a new string indicating a new file name, and you can save different types of data independently. If you want, you can also just add some more values inside of player stats and just do everything inside one file only. In the next video, we're going to see how to delete all data, how to delete specific data, and how to save unserializable things like transform and lists. Alright, so that's it for this video. Hope you learned something new. If you have any doubts or any suggestions about the next topic that you'd like to see, do tell me in the comments. Remember, you can download the entire project through Github if you just want to grab the entire Unity project. And if you have any doubts and you want to ask me directly, chat me up. I'm almost always online on Discord in my personal server. You can get a server invite, link in the description. And make sure to subscribe here on YouTube and to follow me on Twitter to know what I'm working on. Right now, I'm working on a new game for PC. It's called yeah, like and share the video if you want to. And yeah, that's it. See ya.